Hello, fellow druids. This is another full circle. Hopefully, going to be one of my shorter episodes, but we'll see. I want to discuss the where we're at with going first in Steamroller 2017, as of the time of this recording, and we'll start off with the strong statement of I think that almost definitively going first is absolutely the strongest thing you can do in Steamroller 2017. There was a time back in the fall, I would say, leading basically post themes, and even a little before that, like as the theme drop was happening, leading into War Machine Weekend, where I absolutely definitively would tell you that being able to go second a lot of times would net you wins. And I think that was, a big portion of that, depending on the list, and we'll come around to that in a second, a big portion of that was due to people not really being totally familiar with how these scenarios worked and having possibly not really adjusted their lists or their play to accommodate. The number of times, and that's not to say that it still can't work, but I think there's a lot of lists out there that it won't work. It's not going to work against. There's a lot of lists out there with fast and decently tanky battle groups. We see Asphyxius with the Slayers. We see Magnus with a lot of jacks. We've still continued to see some Khador with a lot of jacks. And and then you've got other fast things. I talked about Arcadius in another video. You've got even some of the faster medium-based infantry coming in the game. With some exceptions, I think most factions are better off, I should say, if they go first. I have looked through my own personal win-loss record, and it is notably, or I can note that I definitely am more successful when I've gone first. Now, some of that might be that I've been playing a lot of Una 2 with cavalry and with griffins, and as a result of both of those things, gaining the alpha is very important. It's made me question some of that makes me sort of debate over so Devourosos I think is a very good and well-rounded theme. Part of me wonders a bit at times if Call of the Wild, if I'm reliant on that, and I'm not saying with Una, I'm just saying in general, that +1 to go first, I feel like is, if you follow my discussion right now to its logical conclusion, like that might be something that is of more value than credit is currently being given. And maybe that's something that puts like Kaya 3 into a different situation, or Chromac 2, or even somebody like Chromac 1 possibly. So that's one situation. But I think there's a lot of lists right now, and like I said, I can just look at the games, and that doesn't mean I didn't win games where I went second, but I definitely felt like I was more on my back foot than previously. And I'm starting to wonder if that doesn't mean that we need, or I need to at least be starting to consider lists that can and really even want to go second. And I think by that, what you need is either a significant scenario presence. So I do think like Kruger 2, he's comfortable going first or second. I think his scenario presence allows for that. But there's some of those things, at least the list I'm playing that I think is well-rounded, is still not really the list that I'm feeling totally comfortable playing into a Slayer spam, into a Khador Jack spam. I can play it in Harkovich because he's pretty killable. I might be able to do it into Magnus because, again, he's killable. But some of the other things, I don't know that he's totally the right drop for. So I need to be looking into things like, so what can afford, because you still can't sacrifice your table presence, right? Like you still need to be able to stand somewhere on the table and perform. So that started to make me think. So if we look outside of Circle right now, and some of this is from listening to podcasts, some of this is from my intuition, some is from seeing games. I think, and it's possible that some of these factions are doing well as a result of this. Grimkin Grimkin specifically Dark Menagerie, and Trollbloods in a variety of forms. Both are kind of on the rise right now, and I do wonder, both of those are lists that I feel like, and Troll players are probably going to tell you completely the opposite, but they're both lists that I feel like can step into the zone, going second, and basically say, I'm fine with that, right? I just need to get, I just need to start scoring before, like, if I can start scoring, if I can score before you, that's key, very key, especially if I can additionally prevent you from scoring. And then, I can slowly, I know I'm going to get hit, right? Like, and I just need that to do as little as possible. Trollblood's great at that. Grimkin's pretty tanky and good at that. I think there's some Scorn lists that could be played to go that way. It's not really what I've been seeing out of them. And we don't have a local Scorn player, so I don't know for sure. But because of things like the Agonizer, and they've got defensive buffs, and they're decently higher armor, I think Scorn can play that game. There's a few other lists that can play that game. Harkovich, who I mentioned, I think kind of plays into that. Possibly Magnus. Again, it just depends. I'd have to go through, but there's a few select lists. But in general, like Grimkin and Trollbloods as factions sort of pop out to me. And so that's something I'm going to probably... this thought has not sort of reached its conclusion yet. It's something I'm sort of thinking about. I think Encircle, the most obvious answer on that regard, is probably Baldr 2, which I don't really love. I don't necessarily love that that's the case, because I feel like he is generally pretty dull. He's incredibly technical. He's very strong, but he is certainly not flashy, and he's not exciting. And he's going to take a lot of games to go a lot later than I'm usually playing. I'm considering playing him some just to sort of teach myself another way to play, possibly. We'll see how that actually turns out. I'm not super convinced. I'm also not sure that any of my local players won't absolutely revolt. But that might allow me to play my Una 2, maybe even require a couple tweaks out of the Una 2, but it might allow me to play that Una 2 as sort of my generalist drop, and then Baldr's still able to back up. Actually, they'll probably pair pretty well overall. Baldr, from reports, usually because of the rock wall and because of his spells, you can actually play him into some of the jack spams as long as you play very carefully. And then he also plays into any like shooting style situation, right? So he should play okay into Signar. He should play okay into a few other things with guns. Like, I don't think Retribution wants anything to do with him. You can't really rely, but you like pretty absolutely can't play him into Legion and Grimkin. At least most Legion and most Grimkin, because Wraithbane is pretty popular. And there's going to be a few select things in a few other places where that's going to be the case as well, where ignoring his feat and ignoring his signature spell, like basically if you run into a list that does that, you can't drop him. You need to be able to drop Una there, or whatever your other list is. So that's one possibility I'm looking at. I've got some even farther out there theories that maybe Wormwood can play a little bit of that game, but I don't love it. Maybe Mosar, actually, because with Pillars and with a few other things, the problem I personally have there is he has I have a hard time actually identifying a list that I feel like just synergizes really well with him. And after that, I mean, Circle's not really designed to be the faction to, be taking a hit, right? We don't really, and maybe and then the other side of this, and this is the part that probably is going to need to wait to some degree, which is our infantry gives us that space, right? As long as we're not going to give up all of our infantry to those sort of fast lists that have fewer threats in them, and we can retaliate with our infantry, we may actually be also okay in that regard, right? So like Slayer spam's great, but if one Ravager is all you get out of your Slayer activation, as long as I can keep killing stuff, I'm probably going to be able to win. And so there might be something there. The flaw that I'm really having with that plan is just that it's really, really difficult to get our infantry to to the point where it can I might be able to do that into Slayers because it's still only armor 19, but once we start talking about into Khador Jacks, into even Merc Jacks, that are a little higher armor, and so on, that the math may just go too far to the one side, and that might be all for naught. There might be something there with Mosar where he can control those type of games to a degree, but he is also somebody who has to play incredibly safely. Asphyxious worries me a lot in that scenario, for example, because 14-14, who needs to put down a decent number of pillars, means if Asphyxious is able to get any number of focus on his feet turn, it's super likely that Mosar could just take Hellfires to the face and die. They're straight damage, dice to damage, and he can cast a lot of them, and he only needs 7s to hit. So, and we don't really have a lot of protection for spells these days, so that's definitely going to be a factor. And then, like I said, actually just figuring out a list to play for Mosar has been, we'll go with tricky, in my opinion. So maybe Mosar's one up there, though. I mean, Pillars can sort of change that scenario. Like I said, Kruger doesn't mind going second because he can score. The old Kruger 1 list I played, I think the Morvana 2 list I talked about in another episode, they're both very similar. It's just like 75 points a Tharn, basically, or 66, and then Death Wolves. Might be able to do that sort of thing, but mostly that's sort of the extent of that. I mean, there might be some stuff with running a snapshot, but in my opinion, once you're able to start boosting, that sort of runs away with you too. So anyways, that's the next step from this. Right now I'm sort of feeling like I need to think more about, and this is sort of the beginning of that, more about how going first is so important that, when you talk about, it's sort of similar to when you talk about playing for attrition versus playing for assassination, and why most people start playing for attrition as plan A, at least. And that's because, even some of the best assassinations you're going to get are going to be in the 70, 80, 90% range. And that means in a 5-round tournament, or even a 4-round tournament, you're pretty likely to lose one game, that means, and you can't afford to do that. This might be getting to the point where yes, like the Griffins, the list that really relies on going first might be absolutely stronger in the matchups where it does. But if you know that going second is basically going to make the game unwinnable or approaching unwinnable or something to that nature, then now you're sort of playing that risk of not playing a list that might be able to go second and do okay. So more thoughts going to come on that. As I said, this is kind of a raw thought. It's been mulling in my head since Saturday at least, and probably a little bit before that as well. But that's sort of where we're at. I do think going first right now is probably the strongest, and I need to think about what does that mean when I go second, and how do I need to approach my play or my lists in a different way to avoid that. So anyways, as always, thanks for tuning in. Feel free to share on social media, join in the conversation in the various attached locations, and we'll talk to you next time.